I wish I could go back in time to 14-year-old Amanda with her genetic dark circles and give her this video. Essentially, this video is like 15, 16 years in the making. They are my best tips for concealing the under eyes that I wish I knew a long time ago. If you feel like you're just layering and layering on product and nothing is working to conceal your under eye bags, darkness, this video is definitely for you. If you find it helpful, definitely make sure to give it a thumbs up and let's jump in. So my first tip for you all is something that I wish I learned a really long time ago. It's something that completely changed the way I looked at my dark circles under my eyes, and I'm calling it the head tilt test. Really what the head tilt test does is it helps you actually see if you have pigmentation under the eyes or if you're actually dealing with a lack of volume or a hollowness under the eyes. This test helps us get an actual true look and completely changes any of the other steps that we talk about, so that's why I wanted to include it first. We have no concealer under the eyes. What you're gonna do is you're gonna look straight into a mirror, like the way I'm doing right now, at least into the camera, and you're gonna drop your head down. And I think typically when we're looking down into a mirror, we're looking at these bags that we might have under the eyes and we're really piling on the concealer. That's something that I used to do. And then one day, I actually happened to tilt my head back and I realized that a lot of the previous darkness that I was really layering on concealer to cover went away. The test is if you slowly lean your head back, look at the under eye and notice what part of the under eye still looks dark with pigmentation and the areas under the eye that look light again. We're essentially letting the light naturally fall down on the face so that we can see where the pigmentation truly is and where we just have a lack of light or a hollowness. Let me give you guys another look. See this hollow? I'm going to slowly tilt my head back. And do you see how now I have a more clear vision of where I actually have the pigmentation? Because down here, it looks like I have a lot more pigmentation than I actually do. But when the light naturally hits on this area, I can actually see that I don't have a ton of pigmentation. I have a little bit of pigmentation I'd like to cover, but I'm actually dealing with a hollowness. So when you're dealing with a tear trough, hollowness under the eyes, you actually need to bounce light under the eyes in a way that helps to kind of fill in that hollowness. And I'm gonna show you guys in today's video how to correct that, but I'm also going to show you guys how to correct pigment. That's tip number one. And again, your entire routine hinges on your takeaway from that test. So I highly recommend doing it now. Now, for tip number two, what you probably have already noticed on my face is that I have foundation on. I have a little bit of a lip on as well. I actually do not have any foundation coming up under the eye. Tip number two is do not put foundation under your eye. It's for a couple of different reasons. One reason is that sometimes when you have too many layers of product, your concealer can look more creasy, it can look more cakey. Oftentimes, foundation isn't necessarily formulated for under the eyes, and truly, the under eyes are the most delicate, thin skin on our faces, so you're truly better off using less product and not layering on the coverage. But another reason that I think that people miss often about why you should not take foundation up under the eyes is that it is so often the case that there are just too many variables in our makeup routines at this point, especially with just the way that the beauty world is. The more we are able to simplify a routine, the less variables there are to get something wrong. And if you're just trying to get the basics down, taking away one product that you're potentially putting under the eyes that could make them crease more readily, be an odd shade on you, or even dry out the skin, the less variables, the better here. You might notice we haven't even put concealer on under the eyes yet. Truly, following these tips leading all the way up to your routine is so key. So tip number three is about picking the right shade for under the eyes. And this is something that I truly think that people do not talk about enough. It completely changes the way the under eyes look. And believe me, as a formula obsessed person, I love talking about formula, but shade, especially under the eyes, is a game changer. Tip number 3 is do not go 1 shade, 1.5, 2 shades lighter than your natural skin tone. This is something I still see people recommend people to do. And let me just say this, I have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on concealers since the young age of 14. I literally came out of my mom with dark circles. So I've spent a lot of money on concealer, you guys, and I wish I could go back in time and tell that Amanda to stop buying the ultra brightening concealer, because what often happens is you're left with what I call the reverse raccoon eye effect. It's essentially when you have such a light shade under the eyes, it almost draws attention to the darkness that you have. And if there is blueness, any purpleness that slightly shines through, it actually can look even worse. It can almost give you this gray look under the eye that if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. So if there's one thing that you take away from this video as far as shades for under the eyes, if you can find an exact shade match to you, I say go with it. It will always look the most natural. Let's get some concealer on the face and let's get into tip number 4. So first up, we're gonna talk about how to cover pigmentation, and then we'll go ahead and talk about how to bounce light to cover like a hollowness. But first, let's talk about pigmentation. That's the pigmentation that is present here, and it's present when you have leaned your head all the way back. You guys can see I have some right in there. When we're dealing with pigmentation, my best tip is to think about color correcting. Now, color correctors can often be very confusing for people. And if you're someone that's like, Amanda, I've tried color correcting, I'm layering and layering on a color corrector or concealer and everything just looks heavy, that was me for a very long time, and I'm going to tell you how to avoid that. If you do want to color correct under the eyes, you need to find a good shade that is actually going to counteract the color that you want to cover. And when you are color correcting in the right way, you need less pigment and product overall because you're counteracting a color rather than trying to completely cover it. So we are going to talk about formulas in a second, but I think that the shade that you choose is just as important as the formula. You're going to take a look in the mirror and you're going to look at the pigmentation that you see. So the main pigmentation that I see, a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue. I don't have too much brown pigmentation to cover. A little bit up against my lash line I do, but mostly I'm dealing with just very thin skin and my veins kind of shining through. And that's where you're getting a little bit of that purple and a little bit of the pink. So a good color for me to go with would be a light salmon color or a light peach. Truly, not all color correctors are going to work on all skin tones. I feel like that's kind of like a weird misconception that there is out there. Often I think very light skin is better off going with a very light pink shade, but because I have more yellow undertones, I tend to find that a very light peach shade actually does quite well on me. Now, when we get into more of the medium skin tones, richer shades, like rich kind of apricot shades, work really well for purpleness, for blueness, or if you're even dealing with more of a brown pigmentation under the eyes, a deeper orange shade can really help to neutralize the brown pigment. For more deep skin tones, I highly suggest checking out a coral shade or even a true red color corrector. Will really help to kind of counteract more of a purple under eye. So there is not one color corrector that I could recommend to you all that is going to work on everyone. It really is individualized. That brings me to a little hack that I have for you guys. Another tip. This is tip number 5. And this is the way I kind of simplify all of this. It not only helps you get a more natural effect under the eye, but it actually does help you, I think, get to a better shade quicker. And that is to mix your color corrector into the concealer that you plan on using or the concealer that you already love. So what you're doing is you are adding a little bit of, let's say, an orange shade to counteract a bit of blue under the eye. You're using less product because you don't feel like you need to keep layering on. But you're also getting the advantage of a color corrector by adjusting the shade that already matches your skin tone. So I'm going to show you guys on this eye what I would typically do. Now I have a few color corrector favorites and I also have a few concealer favorites. If you guys want to see a follow-up video just on my concealer recommendations, just on my color corrector recommendations, please leave me a comment down below and subscribe because that would be already on its own like a half an hour long video. I am obsessed with formulation and I know I would just get off on a tangent if I covered it in this video. However, one formula that I love is from Sigma and this is the Spectrum Color Correcting Duo in light to medium. So right here, you see that I have two different options. I love a color correcting palette like this because you get a range of options. Same reason I love this CanMake color mixing corrector. One shade is actually a touch more pink and one has a touch more orange to it, which again really helps you customize. So what I am going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of the lighter shade onto the back of my hand and I'm going to mix one of my holy grail concealers, the Kosas Revealer Concealer in 1.5C, and I'll also give you a swatch of 1.5C. We're seeing way more peach here, and this has way more just straight yellow to it, which, you know, I have more yellow undertones, so that's typically good, but to cover up that pigmentation, you need way less product because we're counteracting that. And I am telling you guys, mixing the color corrector into the concealer, game changer. And what you'll notice, which brings me into the next tip, what tip is this at this point? It's tip number 6. You guys, I am only applying it where I need it. Do you see how I didn't take a giant triangle from here all the way up onto the side of my face? Why? Don't need the pigment there. Why are we putting it there? Remember that we are concealing. So again, I'm just tapping that product in. I do like to use a finger when I'm dealing with more of a potted cream concealer, like a color corrector. And I'll take the excess to kind of correct any veins, any pigmentation. This is one very thin layer of concealer, but that completely covered basically everything that I could want it to. We will finesse, and I have some other techniques to show you guys, but I'm telling you, it is a game changer when you're mixing the corrector into the concealer. I would have typically applied an entire layer of color corrector, an entire layer of concealer, and then this would start to crease pretty immediately, which I will say this is something that I hope more people take away from this video. I hope that people become less afraid of creasing and more afraid of the under eye looking dry and a little bit less natural. Moisture is our friend. We don't need a completely matte, stripped of skin kind of look. Stripped of skin, oh god. What I mean, like stripped of our natural oils. So that is just a little bit of concealer and corrector. Again, complete game changer. It is still crazy to me how such a slight change in color can get you there. Now, tip number 7, we're gonna go ahead and get into hollowness. Now this hollow is a little bit deeper than this one, so I wanted to show you guys on this eye how I would conceal hollowness. But you can see here, this is a great technique for both hollowness and darkness, and that's because we're using a formula that naturally bounces light back from the eyes in a way that is very flattering. And that's why I want to do a whole separate video on concealer formulations that do this. There are tons of concealers that have great pigment for under the eyes and they have a good creamy finish. They're not drying under the eyes. But some of those concealers that are great in most cases can actually exaggerate the hollowness, it's because they don't know how to bounce light away from a hollow. So again, I'd like to do a full video on formulations that actually do this really well. The Kosas Revealer Concealer is absolutely one of those products. Another formulation that is really beautiful for hollowness is the Tower 28 Serum Concealer. This one might be better if you have, or you tend to get more oily skin, but it will look very natural and pretty still under the eye. But I think what I want to use today is the Ciel Tint and Protect Concealer, and this is 03. And what I'm going to do, and this is my next tip for you guys, is a beautiful way to cover hollowness is to take your product just on the doe foot. I love a very thin doe foot applicator like this one because it gets right where I want it. I'm going to take it directly into that hollow up here as well. A lot of people forget that there's often quite a lot of darkness here if you deal with more deep set eyes. And then I'll take a little bit right there. You see how little product I just put on? We are going to completely let this product sit and set. So this is going to work best with like a creamy formula, something, I mean, liquidy, but still has like a creaminess and emollients. This is not going to work well on a very drying concealer, at least if you want like a very natural look. So what I always do is I take the concealer directly into that hollowness and I just let it sit for about a minute. I love it too because it actually saves you money. You're using less product overall and you're getting a more natural look. It's just one of my favorite tips I've ever found. So before we get into tip number 8, wet sponges take away pigment. So if you think that you've over applied product, not a bad idea to go in with a damp sponge, but a dry sponge will just press the product into your face exactly where you want it. That is why I am team dry sponge. Or also, I also love a brush as well. And this is the A506 brush from BK. Perfect little, it kind of like mimics the fingertip. You can see there. You're able to press the concealer in and really maintain the concentrated pigment. So it's beautiful. Highly recommend this brush, but I'm going to use my Ciel sponge today. And I think we've let it sit for well over a minute. This brings me to tip number 8. Do not overblend. And this is one that again, firsthand experience here, I find that sometimes, makeup is incredibly meditative for me. I love it. Sometimes I zone out, sometimes I'm just in my own world, and then I look at my blend and then I realize that I've kind of blended away all of my pigment. What you're going to do is you're going to look in the mirror, you are going to blend the product, and when you are happy with the amount of pigment that you have, you're going to stop blending. You don't have to sit and blend and bounce your sponge for forever. Like, it will take maybe 1 or 2. You see how I've been blending for a very, very short amount of time and I'm pretty much done? Any of the excess on the lid, this is how I typically prep my lids. We definitely have the most concentrated coverage right where I actually need it. Tip number 9 is one that, again, I just feel like almost every tip in this video kind of completely changed the game for me. This one was like the hack that I felt like more people needed to know immediately. We already kind of played around with this one in tip number 8, but it's called hollow highlighting. And essentially what you're doing is taking thin lines of pigment right directly into a hollow that you have and bouncing light back so that you get a more full, smooth, flush look under the eyes. Ciel absolutely killed it with this brush, the Pinpoint Conceal. It's beautiful for like spot concealing as well. I'll show you at the end how it works on spots. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to take this very, very thin brush or whatever thin brush that you have. You're going to take your concealer. I'm just going to mix these a little bit. These are closer to my natural shade. And I'm just going to take a little bit of the orange, a little color corrector. Just make sure I have a color that I want. And you see how we can barely see that hollow? And what I'm going to do is just take the brush directly into it. You notice how it kind of immediately bounces that light back? This technique gives you the most natural look, but actually prevents the product from creasing and caking up. And sometimes I'll even take my brush and blend it out. Oh my gosh, it's a complete game changer. I also love taking it right up here where I typically get a little bit dark in that corner. It brings forward the shadow right where you need it to, rather than taking the color corrector, the concealer all over. Beautiful, beautiful technique. You can actually do this. I can kind of show you guys on this eye. I don't really need it, but why not? You know, we're here. I'll do the same thing and just right into that hollow. This brush is perfect. It's so fine that it just fits right into that hollow. Then you can even take the other side and just tap it. So little product. And by the way, you see how I'm slowly, as I, you know, get older, the bag is starting to come up a little bit. If you have any bag over here, you can also take the product directly into that bag and soften it up. So this works no matter what your anatomy is, no matter what the under eye looks like. You can take this directly into the deepest hollow that you have, whether it's a bag, whether it's a trough, and it can bring that forward. I just love doing this though. At the very end with the excess product, just kind of lifts the eye in a really pretty effect, or in a pretty way to give it a nice effect. I know I said this was going to be like a 10-tip video, but I have 2 more tips. One tip is semi-related to this concealer thing, but it's not a concealer. I want to talk to you guys about setting the under eye because I know I'm going to get questions about this. I very often recommend a pressed powder because I think, I don't know, I feel like you're not going to overuse a pressed powder as much as you might overuse a loose powder, because I think with loose powders, it's hard to tell like how much product you actually have. But here's what I will say about setting the under eye. I personally think that if you're going for the most natural under eye effect and you have very, very dry skin, try going a day without setting it with powder and just tapping out the creases as they come through. You might be surprised. I think that sometimes people are applying so much powder that it looks very unnatural, but had we just skipped powder and just occasionally tapped out any creases that we have under the eyes, you might actually notice that it doesn't bother you as much. Now, I know that not everyone is like that, so we are going to talk about powder, but that's just something that I've realized over the years, is that oftentimes I'll just skip powder because I would rather the skin look as natural as possible rather than I have like a crease or two. At least the moisture is maintained under the eyes. There are some powders out there that are really, really beautiful. The market has gotten a lot better with this over the years. The Kosas Cloud Set is very good. This is the shade Candy. It's more of a pink shade for more of a brightened look. You don't necessarily need a pink shade. You could just do translucent. I really like this one from CanMake as well. This is the shade A Bloom. But I think just to show you how I would use a loose powder, let's go ahead with the Rare Beauty. This is a beautiful powder, by the way. So you can see we're not going to use all of that. Barely any product in here. I'm just going to take it onto the brush, and I'm really going to notice how the brush is being coated. So I think oftentimes we kind of just dunk the brush and we're not really looking or thinking about how the powder is going to be applied. It needs to be even on the brush so that it's going on evenly under the eyes. If you have some areas with a lot of powder and some areas with less, you're actually not evenly adding the powder under the eyes, and some areas will be more likely to cake up and crease, while others will remain emollient, and then you will get kind of like a jagged or just more textured look. It won't be as smooth. So there's a bunch of tips just about powder itself. The bonus tip that I was going to give you guys is that you're going to take that brush, and if you want to help conceal a hollow, this is like a little trick that I do. I call it kind of cutting the hollow. What you're going to do is you're going to take the powder, you're going to set the side of your nose, and then you're going to move across the hollow. And what that does is it actually fakes the light to make everything look more flush. You see how that already, like the side of my nose, the volume of this area already looks more similar it looks like there's less of a difference in the actual fullness and playing with it in a way that makes everything look flush. So again, if you are adding powder to your brush like that, you have so many different areas that are going to get a wildly different amount of pigment. So tap that off, take a look at your brush. It should look something like that. You just need way less pigment than you often think. Then again, same thing over here, taking it up against the nose and then cutting across. And so everything looks more flush. If you're just taking the powder on the under eye and not setting this area, light might be reflecting here, bringing the fullness forward, and then this will sink back down. I also take the excess on the lids as well. And there you go, guys. That is how you conceal both pigmentation and hollowness under the eyes. But let's get into my last concealer tip. I have a blemish here, as you guys can see. Let's take a look at this blemish that I have over here. What you guys will notice is that obviously it's more rounded. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my concealer on the back of my hand. My hand is like a complete concealer palette at this point. I'm going to, again, spot conceal. This is like the pinpoint concealer method. There's more technique than just spotting it on. We're going to cover the blemish, but what we're actually going to do is we're going to make sure that we're covering it completely around rather than just going from one angle. Take your brush from the side, over, on top, and to the other side. We're covering the entire surface and roundness of the pimple because pimples are not completely flat against our face. So now the entire pimple is concealed. I truly think that some people pile on the concealer right on a pimple, but they're confused why they can still see the pigment. It's because there are certain angles to the pimple that are actually shining through still and not getting covered. And that, my friends, were my 10 tips on how to conceal the under eye. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video, and if you have any other questions, please leave me a comment down below. And if you want to see that top 10 concealer video about all the formulations that actually work for hollowness, that work for pigmentation, definitely leave me a comment down below and make sure you're subscribed. But overall, thank you guys for being here, and I will see you in my next one.